Welcome to episode 9 of the This Week in Overwatch League podcast. I can't believe we're almost already at double digits for this series. Kind of crazy, but we have a lot to talk about, as usual. But we had some big time results both in the East and the West that have kind of made both the playoff and play-in cutoffs a bit more buzzing with life. What happened this week, I think, gave us a lot of answers and also a lot of questions and just a bunch to look forward to in general, Like, in the last month or so of play, it's going to be super exciting. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, I think it's about time that we dive into week 3 of the summer stage qualifiers. And I can't think of a better place to start than with the Florida Mayhem. Because right now, at least if we're going off recency, and what happened in the last couple of weeks, the Mayhem feel like the best team in the league. I know that I, for one, have doubted them a lot, and I do apologize to Mayhem fans for that. But now they've totally proven themselves at this point. They've done it. They've beaten Houston. They've beaten Atlanta. They've beaten Boston. They're the kings of the world. And in their most recent showing, they beat Atlanta Reign, and they did so in pretty convincing fashion, in large thanks to their flexibility, I'd say. It's exactly how the Outlaws beat them just a couple weeks prior, but Florida did so with even more enthusiasm and even more convincingly. Their flexibility this entire season has really been top-notch. They just play a lot of different heroes without having to sacrifice any of their real strengths, and someone in particular has been a leader on the tank role. He can literally just play well on any tank in the game. It's kind of insane, and he's quite obviously an MVP candidate, and if Florida can continue to dominate, then he might actually end up being the front runner for that. But at the very least, he's probably the best tank in the game right now. Like, this Mayhem team just plays so well together and around him. They're a very scrappy group. We've known that all season. They're really confident in their abilities. They're young. They're growing at a pretty immense rate. And they're only gaining more strength as time goes on. As the map pool and composition variants are starting to gain more relevance in the meta, so are they. Atlanta found this out the hard way, I'd say, as well, as, like with many other foes this season, there was zero answer for the Mayhem's ability to make a lot of different comps work, depending on their situation, depending on the map being played and what's being thrown at them. And if you are not prepared for them, if you're not versatile yourself, they're just going to punch you in the mouth, and you'll be left there wondering what the hell went wrong. And as time went on in the series, I think that the Reign had less and less and less responses to what the Mayhem were throwing at them. Florida were practically running circles around them at certain points during this game. The Widow threw them off, the Echo even, the positioning flip at the start of Caliseo, and going super fast with the rush comp, playing well with that confidence, it just never really seemed to stop. That versatility makes them a very difficult foe, and Atlanta not being well practiced ended up hurting them yet again. We continue to find that out the hard way. Their answers to the difficult problems in front of them are practically non-existent. And while this is a big problem for Reign, it does go to show that Florida are a lot more prepared and that they're truly peaking at the right time. Well, I guess the meta's going to change soon, but you get what I mean. They're starting to get hot towards the end of the season, and if you go off history, that's typically what you want. This is what they've been waiting for. A moment where their biggest strengths can finally be put on full display and be taken in full effect. The Mayhem are kicking butt right now. They're beating all of the best possible competition, both convincingly and in a super clutch manner. And it's because of their efforts that they're currently in an excellent spot to be guaranteed to make that top 3 playoff cutout and getting to avoid those knockouts altogether. They have officially caught up to Atlanta Reign in win total at 12, and in theory, even though it's not going to be easy because Reign have a really good map differential, they could technically steal away first place. If not, though, all they really have to do is come back strong after the break, take care of business in that final week, and top 3 is basically guaranteed. This is like such an amazing late season surge by the Mayhem. They're finally showing that they've leveled up and they're where they need to be competing for a title, and they're undoubtedly the team that we have to try and beat if you're the rest of the league as we head towards the break and onward in August and September and October. As for the Atlanta Reign, as we look more towards them, they're kind of in a big pickle right now, for lack of a better term. This has now happened not once, but twice, where these top teams go up against them and they throw them off guard by playing a style that just isn't what the Reign are completely used to. They have a flexibility issue. And now that they can't get away with playing their dive 24/7 and the map pools are making things a bit more complicated, they've looked pretty human. Not just against Florida and Houston, but in a lot of the matches they've played so far here in the summer stage. I mean, they just don't feel right. They're still good, they're still a hard team to beat, but they feel confused, like visibly. Lip himself even said like GG's, I think, in that Florida loss tweet. Chio or like Field or whoever it was slamming their desk. You can tell they're frustrated because they know they shouldn't be losing. They know they can beat these teams because they already have. And they're just having a difficult time coping with that and finding the answers they're looking for. They are an excellent team, but they've lost that leg up that made them so dominant. And that could be a problem because there are some really talented teams in the league they're going to have to get through if they ultimately want to win the championship. Variance in the current meta is something they just have to figure out, right? They have to crack down during the break and find a solution. Like I said before, the Reign had absolutely no answer to Florida's map-dependent strategies, and we saw it to a certain extent against Boston, and we saw it against Houston as well. And in the Florida game in particular, this idea of throwing Genji comps at the wall, like I think on, what was it, Caliseo and Eichenwald, was just not very good. Like, they won Eichenwald, but not super convincingly. It's no fault of, like, Stalker. I don't really think you can blame him. This is mostly just a Reign strategy. And Genji just happens to not be very good. Like, we've seen it work somewhat in APAC, I guess, but against a top team like Florida, I don't really know if it's worth it. And even with Nanoblade, the results were mediocre for a kind word, I'd say. And obviously that's a problem just because you're investing in this 2-ult combo and it's basically not helping you at all. There's just so much confusion and dysfunction going on with Atlanta, and it's not something we've been very used to. They look human, like I've been saying. And part of that might be that things are changing too fast for them. Part of it might be that it's a tough couple of weeks in terms of preparation. They haven't been scrimmy against these teams. But it's not easy when you're at the top. Like I was saying as we were heading into the summer stage, this is the team that has a target on their back now. That's who everybody wants to beat and overcome. That's the last step, really, if they want to win a championship. So there's really no excuse. As much as I'd love to say there is one, you can't give the Reign a pass just because the last couple of weeks have been hard for them. Houston, Florida, and Boston all went through the same gauntlet, you know? They are clearly more prepared, or at least in Houston and Florida's case, right? Atlanta are starting to fall behind. And I mentioned it just a little bit ago, but it only becomes more evident when you start analyzing what happened in that Boston series, right? Because realistically, they probably get reverse, well, I can't say probably, but there's a strong possibility that they might end up getting reverse swept if Smurf doesn't fumble the bag on Caliseo. If you watch that map, you know exactly what I mean. Smurf had his Rampage online. You know, Atlanta were clearly winning the fight, but he still burnt it anyway. So then they didn't have that valuable resource in Final Fight territory, and then Reign ended up pulling out the comeback at the last moment to take that map. And had Smurf not thrown that ult away for no good reason, there's a possibility that Boston hold, and then we go to map 5. And if that happens, I don't know if there's any coming back for Reign. Boston pretty much had all the momentum. They mentally boomed the Reign, I think especially after Circuit Royale, let's be honest. Like I said before, it was Chio or Fielder, can't remember who. Someone was pissed off after losing this map, because it's basically just a repeat of what happened against Toronto, where they looked pretty good on their attack, but then they fumble like crazy, and they end up losing on extra rounds in Circuit Royale. Like, it happened twice in the span of a week. You don't think it can get any crazier than what happened in Toronto just for Boston to basically do the same exact thing to you. And because of that, they're visibly frustrated. They know they feel like they shouldn't be losing, but they are anyway. And sadly, even though there was this golden opportunity for them, Boston failed to take advantage, thanks to maybe some pressure and some poor decisions at the very last moment. That pivotal mistake by Smurf definitely stings them. But at the same time, there was more than one fight on push in these other maps, so Smurf definitely doesn't have all of the blame in this situation. I mean, I think some of the Boston players maybe could have played better. They looked pretty locked in, but you have to give some credit to Atlanta, even though they've had a bad week, I think, more than anything. Because Fielder, that guy played like a man possessed in this series, especially on Colosseo. He carried the rain on his back, him and Chio both. He refused to lose that game, and they most certainly do not close out map 4, and they possibly get reverse swept if him and Chio don't step up the way they did. Fielder's Ana play was next level in this series. There were so many different fights where Atlanta probably should have lost, especially on push, but Fielder refused to give a single inch. I think there was like one moment, I mean, Boston would end up getting like the checkpoint or the lead anyway, whatever it was, but it was basically just like him and Chio and like one other team member fending for themselves. They were down a couple of members, but this man pocketed Chio like no tomorrow. They stayed alive, and that stall kind of helped them win the map, I'd say. That's one of the other contributing factors. And that bought them the time they needed to win, I'd say. But also, for a cherry on top, let's not forget on like the final few maps in overtime where Fielder panic swapped to Kiriko. You know, like Twilight was on that hero already. He's like, I got to get back fast. Got to go on this hero, match them, have the Suzu, maybe to help out with Smurf's ult, even though he wasted it. But he ended up making it work. For whatever the reason that he picked it, it ended up working brilliantly, as he literally lapped Twilight in ult charge at the end of the map, even though he was so far behind and it was a panic swap. Like, it just goes to show how locked in he was and that refusal to lose. He is a monster, and I don't even want to begin to imagine how the series ends up going if he doesn't step up the way he does. The Raid narrowly, oh so narrowly, avoided losing 3 of their last 4 matches, and possibly booming as we head into a break. With that said, the Rain have an obvious problem. We've been talking about it a lot already so far, and we're going to continue to. We can't just sit around and say, lip go kill anymore, right? That strategy clearly is outdated, overrated, and is not going to work with how the game is evolving right now. It's time for Atlanta Rain to crack down and work on their craft. Because if things stay the way they are right now, you're at risk of serious failure and disappointment and flopping, whatever you want to call it. This Florida, Houston, and Boston series of matches were a real eye-opener that people are starting to catch up to them. If they still want to be the best, they've got to adapt. The first step is going to be becoming a lot more practiced on this stuff that they're struggling so brutally on. That execution just has to improve. You have the talent and you have the resources. I mean, your backline and DPS lines are some of the best in the world. Now you just have to put in the work. That words. Then the thing after that, though, along with that, is going to be to figure out what you want to do on tank, right? Obviously, you want Stalker to do better on the Mei. You want Lip to do better off things that aren't named Sombra, I guess. And for Fielder to not get outplayed by Shu in like those Baptiste situations. But also, tank comfort is pretty big. Tank has always been like the glaring hole since the start of this season for Rain. And right now, it's causing them more trouble than it ever has before. Do you want to try playing Hawk more, since he's the better Ramatra player, and he can play Queen and stuff for those control maps as well? Or are you going to hope that Donghack improves the stuff that he isn't as good on, so he's not just a Winston and ball player? Those are the serious questions that Rain have to find answers to during this final stretch. They've got a long break in front of them, so it's time to maybe relax and get a bit of a mental reset, if you will, but also practice and be prepared. Things can change on a dime, but flexibility is so important in Overwatch 2. I don't give a damn if the meta is like completely different come October. It's just better to be prepared. And the same applies for whatever meta may come between the short break and now. There's a new hero coming, a new patch, a new game mode. There's a lot to prepare for. And while it's possible the meta ends up swinging in a new direction that cancels out some of these issues that you're dealing with, you just can't count on that. You can't be counting on luck, you know? You have to be ready for literally anything. You can't just sandbag and focus on the playoffs. You have a job to do right now. If you want the 1 seed, if you want to feel confident that you can win the championship, you've got to finish strong. Nothing is worse than finishing flat. It has costed many teams in the past, so it is not worth the risk. I want to see them play with their heart out, down this final stretch. I want to see them play like they want it, like there's a new level they can reach still. They've got to figure out their root issues and focus up on the upcoming changes. Every team is starting from scratch, which is beneficial. That learning process is going to put everyone on kind of an equal ground in a way, but that doesn't mean necessarily that the playing field is going to be totally even, right? The flexible teams, the talented teams, they're going to be the ones with better odds of success. If Atlanta want to be a part of this club, they have to figure it out. The Reign right now in their current state are clearly vulnerable for the top teams in the West to take advantage of, and they have some big time problems to address. And for the sake of meeting those expectations and not flopping in a season that clearly belongs to them, let's just hope they can do it. Next though, I think I'm actually going to slide over to the East. I know I don't do that often, but this Dallas Infernal game has been a rather big headline. There's been a lot of talk about it. A bunch of people have asked for my opinion on it. So I figured we should get it out of the way early since it is pretty important in terms of like where the top teams in the East currently stand. So at least for me, I'd say that the final result in this matchup was rather surprising. Dallas sweeping the best team in the region most certainly was not on my bingo card. I mean, they won this game in pretty impressive fashion. You 3-0'd the most dominant team in your region this whole season. Soul Infernal have been on a roll. They have literally owned this region. But in this one, Dallas held their ground and showed that they're reaching a new level and that they're improving very rapidly. They put together some strongholds both on map 2 and map 3, and then also they played pretty clutch on Oasis. This map came down to the wire, and there was like a moment on University where they kind of pulled a lost fight around out of nowhere, and large thanks to Bliss just playing like a maniac, dodging shots like a boss. It was super impressive watching him and this Dallas team play the way they did. This was the game that they really needed to prove themselves, and they did it masterfully. They play at such an insane level right now. I'm honestly so surprised to see all of this life coming out of nowhere. Clearly, Rush and the boys are locking in, and they're not satisfied with what they showed us in the first half. Their play is just steadily improving, and improving, and improving, and Hanbin looks more comfortable on Winston. The DPS line look lively. The support line is elevating themselves. I mean, Bliss has been on a tear lately, even winning player of the match one time. But honestly, if there's one individual that I've really been impressed by, just in terms of raw improvement and being less of a liability, it's gotta be MCD. He seems to have found his role within the team, at least right now. His positioning is getting a lot better, and I think as a result, those enemy dives that were consistently destroying Dallas have been a lot less potent. He's keeping himself as well as Bliss alive, he's being in safer positions, he's able to nano Bliss in a lot of those situations when he's on Brig. The timing feels a lot better, he's doing a better job of playing far back, and nobody seems to be punishing him for it. It's almost like, what Fielder does in a way, not nearly to the same level, but you can tell that Rush's coaching is kind of maybe influencing him to do some similar things, at least in terms of being in the right place. Dallas don't necessarily need a hero at this position. It would of course help them be a lot stronger, but with what they have, I think just having someone who enables their other guys is really important. And MCD is slowly starting to become that guy. And it's obvious that Rush and the boys have been in the lab, really practicing this stuff, and it's been very successful. They 3-0'd the best team in the East by far, and now you could argue they are the kings of the region. However, in my opinion, this game comes with an asterisk. Dallas definitely deserved the win. I'm not going to take that away from them. Chill out, Dallas fans. But I do think that people may be jumping the gun a little too quick. Some people are already starting to ask if they stack up with the West now, and others are saying they're easily the best team in the East because they 3-0'd Infernal, but I'm not really totally convinced yet. Infernal got 3-0'd by them, yeah, that's obvious, it happened, but I'm willing to bet that the next time, if there is a next time, is going to go differently. It's not to say that Dallas couldn't win that game. I think they very well could. It's more that Infernal just had a really weird day. They recently got hit by COVID, which may have affected their gameplay in terms of being able to focus. as well as being isolated and not being used to their normal team environment. And on top of that, I don't think there's any way in hell they throw away two, not one, but two 5-minute time banks again. Like, that was some brutal fumbling, and you'd have to imagine after they studied the film, they would not allow something like this to happen ever again. Like, they did their job on defense on both maps. Literally, all 3 maps were extremely winnable for them. There's a world where if Infernal just execute, they are the ones that end up winning the series, or at the very least win maps 2 and 3, you know? Like, Infernal are just not a team that stays down for super long. I learned that the hard way in mid-season madness, when I doubted them when we came back from the break and then they played well. They don't let this stuff get to them. They have a very quick short-term memory with these types of L's. And if these two were to meet again, I just don't think it's going to be a blowout. Infernal have been the most consistent team in the region. There is no way that it would be a blowout again. Here in the present, though, I think it's totally fine to say Dallas are the best team. If you want to, they literally just beat the best team. It's cool. I get it. But I don't know if it's necessarily the case in the long run. Dallas definitely are improving. They deserve loads of credit. But let's wait and see. They're in a good place, but the East is wide open. Things change fast, and as someone who rated Dallas highly, I'm going to hope this continues, but let's keep the optimism in the air at cautious levels, just because things could change on a dime, like I've been saying, and all of a sudden they could be out of it again. That's about it for the Dallas side of things and what I think of the East situation in general. So now we're going to move back out west and talk about an unfortunate, but also, I guess, kind of interesting and exciting match. That being the Vegas Eternal, who perhaps had one of the biggest fumbles in recent memory in terms of like a real-time match. This reverse sweep was so bad against the Valiant, and for so many different reasons. The level of incompetence was astonishing. The first half of this series was all Vegas Eternal. Eichenwald was not close. Oasis, they clearly had control. They were getting absolutely steamrolled by Knife and Finale. Valiant looked absolutely dead in the water, and the series fell over. I mean, even on Gibraltar, Valiant were putting up a better fight, but coming into the last fight of that map, Vegas had a solid chance of closing it out. It wasn't until Dove ended up throwing away an EMP literally right before last fight that things ended up taking a turn for the worst. I mean, Vegas were kicking themselves, I think, just knowing that this game should have been over right there and then. There's no reason they shouldn't have won and just gotten it over with. They had all of the momentum in the world, but they blew it. And then what proceeded after this was so incredibly embarrassing, and it made them spiral out of control into one of the biggest downhill tumbles I've ever seen. Part of it might be just being unfamiliar with each other and on ping, but I think a lot of it lies on the decision making and the choices that the coaching made and the substitutions and the poor execution at the end and starting to question themselves, like on map 5. I mean, the Dove thing alone, that was pretty costly. Like, some people were wondering why Finale got subbed out in the first place on Gibraltar. That was really silly just because of how good him and Knife were looking in terms of their synergy and dominating the Valiant backline. But then things got taken up to a whole new level when they decided it was a good idea to bench their best player, Knife. In a closing map scenario, mind you, on map 4, with the lead, with a chance to keep Valiant from building up their momentum, Vegas willingly benched their carry. I don't give a damn what's working for you in scrims, what works for you on certain maps. There should never be a reason for this guy to ever be on the bench when he has practically been the only semblance of life Vegas have shown, not just this half, but the entire season in general. Without him, you could tell they were lacking. You could tell something was missing. The energy wasn't quite there. They were just missing that extra boost, that guy who can pull picks out of nowhere. That's what you need when you suck, you know? And it ended up proving to be a costly mistake, as they'd lose this map for one, but two, they allowed for Seeker to get hot. And we all know how dangerous this guy becomes when he's hitting his shots and when he's feeling himself. And on top of that, it gave the Valiant a lot of life. Valiant, as we all know, are very momentum-based. One map is basically all it takes to completely shift their mindset, and we saw that in the final 2 maps of this series, like just noticeably more confidence, more focus, better execution on the stuff they're comfortable on. Vegas made the mistake of giving their opponents a chance while pretty much shooting themselves in the foot in the process. This was like a tragic fumble. This wasn't just Valiant playing better. This was Vegas literally gift wrapping this win to them. This might have been, quite possibly, their only chance to avoid going winless this year, and they blew it for pretty much no reason at all. I just feel so bad for the players. Like, they had it, man. Specifically for Rack Attack, right? That guy, you feel the worst for. He took it really hard. You could see it on the player cams after the match ended. He was just totally devastated. And who could blame him, right? People forget that he still has not won a single game in his career in the Overwatch League. And he's been here for like a solid year now. That's really tough. I really hope the guy's doing okay. That can really hurt your mental. And for the sake of him, and for somebody like Knife who's playing with all he's got, I pray that Vegas can pull off just some kind of upset. It would be so depressing after what I saw Rack's face go through to have to finish another season winless and be one of the only guys in league history to have never won a game. Like, come on. There has to be some kind of hope, right? I believe they have San Francisco coming up, I think twice even, and they have the Vancouver Titans as well. So maybe it's technically not too late. I think because they've played pretty well that it's not unstoppable, what am I saying? Not impossible. I mean, they showed life in the Valiant game, they showed life in their Boston game, and in the London game as well. They're doing enough to stay in it. They're just not crossing the finish line. That's the last step with them. But it's going to be really tough for them, even though it's possible. They really have to lock in and play like their lives depend on it, and I think that's the only way, really. A winless season really could just be around the corner for them, and with their winless week here, it's also worth noting, as we look more towards history, that they now possess solely the second longest losing streak in Overwatch League history, if you date back to last season to the present. I believe this number now is 28, but they are now very close to having 30 consecutive losses. Luckily for them, there's not enough time to catch up to Shanghai, but it's really sad to be in that position. Like, how the mighty have fallen from 2020 Eternal all the way to now. Like, that's a sad, sad downward slope they went down. But funnily enough, this game was also kind of historic for the Valiant side of things. If we look over here, you'll see that they are now officially tied for the most reverse sweeps in league history with Boston, New York, and San Francisco. So that's pretty cool, right? I mean, in the grand scheme of it, it's not going to matter. The Valiant season's already over. They can't make the playoffs. But you got to take the little victories where they can come, just knowing what the Valiant have been since 2021. Their efforts don't mean much in the present, but take the small victories where you can, you know? And it's just funny as well that the reason they're now tied is literally because of this season alone. A season with no expectations has seen the Valiant get their only 2 wins of the season come in reverse sweep fashion. Like, what are the odds of that, man? Only the Valiant would be capable of such a thing. Only a team with so many amazing personalities could do that. I'm happy for them, but also really sad for Vegas. Both of their seasons are done, but at least it could end on a pretty fun and interesting note, I suppose. But speaking of teams that were at the bottom, at least at one point, how about the London Spitfire, man? Once again, coming out strong, continuing their winning streak that is now dated back to, their game against Toronto right before Midseason Madness. They've won like 5 games in a row now, haven't they? Pretty insane stuff. I mean, strictly in terms of how they stack up to other mid-table teams, maybe you aren't that impressed, maybe you aren't that convinced that they're gonna, be one of the better mid-table teams that has a chance of making the playoffs. But who the hell cares at this point? London, in the span of like 3 weeks, have completely turned around their season. They went from dead in the water, absolute trash cans, to 6 wins, and not just possibly making the play-ins, but likely to make the play-ins. They literally were one of the worst teams, not just in the region, but period, just a month ago. And now they're one of only 3 mid-table teams with 6 wins. They played super great once again the entire weekend. I have nothing but good things to say. There are some bad moments here and there, but mostly really strong stuff. They dominated the Gladiators like it was nothing, landed an Admiral, decimated the Glads, and they had zero answers for them. And then in the Vegas game, when there was resistance shown, they still cracked down and were able to maintain their edge, winning 3 maps in a row, even though things were pretty close and kind of scary at times if you're a London fan. This was a very worrisome matchup, and Vegas maybe came in a bit stronger than I and even London fans were expecting them to. The Vegas series, I thought, really could have gone either way. A bunch of these maps, the score doesn't really imply anything, especially like Numbani and then Esperanza, right? Like, really close stuff here. Vegas came to play in this one. They occasionally were outplaying London in the rush battle too. Like Busan, London played Rhine like the entire time and Vegas still beat them. Like, that's impressive just knowing that no other team so far has had an answer for what London's doing. Vegas was the first team to have an answer for it. Not something you'd ever expect to hear yourself say, but here we are. And this really did come dangerously close to map 5. Push was super duper close. There was a lot of map flipping going on, a lot of lead changing. For a while, Vegas were in control of it. It's just that London were able to avoid disaster in the end because Hottie was doing Hottie things on the Rhine, having a really disrupted style of play, causing chaos, solo shattering to you. And then Sparker also locked in, and I'd say at least on map 4, put Knife in his place. That refusal to lose really came in clutch. It became very evident with all the shots he was hitting on Hanzo in a pretty dire situation. London, while playing well, were not out of the woods. I think that getting that 6th win was super important for them, just because now they have a leg up over a lot of the other mid-table teams. And their map differential wasn't that great either, so pulling this one out is really massive, even if it is just Vegas. Every win counts at this point for them, and I'm really impressed by it. I'm really impressed by the resilience after their poor start to their season and their full-time commitment to their comfort picks, regardless of what map comes their way. Even on Numbani and Gibraltar, they're going to play Rhine. They don't care. They know that's what they're best at, and it shows with the results. They just look like a more confident team. This is exactly what they needed to do to have any sort of chance, and now they are being rewarded handsomely for this decision because now, like I was just saying, they're kind of out of the danger zone. Beating Vegas as well as the Gladiators puts them up to 6 wins, and with the Valiant around the corner still, they could potentially get up to number 7. And a lot of us, a couple of weeks ago were saying that 7 was going to be the magic number, and now they have a good chance to actually meet it. And on the other side of it, Vegas did a pretty good job in this one. Their season is basically done, but in terms of having a chance of not going winless, I think that the fighting spirit they're showing continuously gives you at least a little bit of hope. Maybe not a lot, but enough to keep you invested, enough to convince you there's still a chance. Oh, and also shout out to Vegas for pretty much doubling the amount of LIFEWEAVER that was played this entire season, because unironically, they used it in a composition. Also at the same time, ironically, anytime Weaver has been used this year outside of Spawn, it's involved Vegas in some way, shape, or form, but now the turns have tabled. They're the ones using it instead of being memed on. And while it didn't get them any map wins, it was pretty fun to see them actually use this comp and somewhat make it work. I wouldn't say totally making it work, but we saw some moments of brightness. Like, this was an actual strat on Gibraltar, and it found mild success. This idea of staying out of Hottie's reach on the Rhine with lots of verticality was a pretty cool theory. Weaver is not a great hero, so, it kind of fell flat in the end, but they won some fights, so you got to take the W's where you can. Also, it kind of reminded me heavily of when Mercy was meta way back in like 2018, playing around Res. It allows for you to just play so much without worrying about the mistakes all the time. You can be a bit riskier, knowing that there's some kind of bailout there if you do overstep your boundary. It gives you more freedom to maybe make some big plays out of thin air. And in the case of Vegas Eternal, this is not a bad idea at all. A bunch of your players are primarily on ping, with teammates they're not super used to, and also with Rack Attack in there, you have to account for a Western player. So if you're able to delete some of those errors to a certain extent, it increases your chances of winning. Maybe not by a lot, but here in the early stages of being a team together, it's not a terrible idea. It's just unfortunate that a lot of moments where he got utilized, he was kind of his terrible, how do I want to word this? His terrible bugs and just being easily countered were put on full display. Like 2 of Rack's pulls in this one with like all the observers on him, either A, got countered by a backbone wall, or B, got cucked by the freaking objective. I mean, Pull absolutely needs to work through the cart. I think it's ridiculous that they got denied because of something as stupid as that. They've got to fix this character. They've got to make him better. That's all I really have to say there. Like, it's just so dumb that we actually get to see LIFEWEAVER for like one of the only few times, and all we get to see is how broken he really is in like the worst way possible. Either way though, we did get more Weaver, and Rack kind of just became the front runner for best Weaver in the league, so that's a W in my book. Moving away from Vegas though, I think I want to shift gears back over to LA Gladiators next, because their season right now, folks, is spiraling out of control. And I mean that in the worst way possible. I'll try to be somewhat brief here because I have a video focused on this coming out soon, a What is Wrong with the LA Gladiators video, but I think it's safe to say that the Glads are currently in the biggest danger zone of any of the mid-level teams. A scrappy dark horse earlier this season that was competing with the likes of Florida Mayhem has turned into somebody that you don't even recognize. They're losing left and right. Since the start of the stage, they've been blown out 3 different times, right? And on top of that, they got reverse swept by the Valiant. That's what they have to show on the summer stage so far. Like, that is a major yikes. Glads were one of the teams that I think a lot of us were the least concerned about when it came to missing the play-ins, just based off of their competitive nature and beating the teams they should, and occasionally punching up to their competition. Just knowing what talent they have, along with their early season peaks, it felt like there was no reason to be in panic mode with them. But now all of a sudden, after a bad couple of weeks, they've given up their lead and everything's falling apart. If you count the mid-season Madness knockouts, they've lost 6 games in a row. And with their terrible week, they have dropped all the way down to 11th place in the standings. In other words, if the play-ins were to start today, the Glads would miss out completely. Let me see if I can show you guys real quick. As you can see, yeah, here. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. As you can see, though, the Glads down here all the way to 11th, -9 map differential, 5 and 7 right now. Oof. Big oof. But anyway, they've dug themselves into a pretty ginormous hole at this point. If the play-in started today, they'd be watching from home. And at this point, it may actually take a miracle to turn this around. Their season may actually already be over unless they pull something crazy out of their butts. And I say that for 2 different reasons. One, this team looks awful. I mean, like, the last time I saw the Glads play this poorly was when iRemix was the starter. It is obvious that this Marvel adjustment has gone poorly. Him and the team just can't get in sync. I don't know what the reason is for that. Maybe you think Marvel stinks. Maybe it's on the rest of the team. Maybe it's on, being on ping across the world. Regardless, though, it's gone really badly. People are going to say things like, this would have happened if Dante was still here, which I think is a pretty easy conclusion to come to. It's an easy scapegoat tactic, but I don't really know if things go better if he's there. Maybe they look a bit more competitive, but in my opinion, the Dante bridge had already been burned in more ways than one. He didn't want to play there, he felt like a problem, and it's clear that they also thought he was part of the problem. Like, I'm sure that he shared a lot of the blame for those shortcomings in the knockouts. It was directed towards him, and to a certain extent it definitely is true. But I think in the end it actually highlights a more pressing matter. The disappointment ended up getting everybody frustrated from top to bottom. I think that panic maybe set in a little bit, and they lost what made them so special, and the coaches weren't able to rally the team enough. And too much of the blame game ended up ensuing as a result, and lots of people ended up not stepping up as well. I think that's pretty critical. We can sit here and yell at Marvel all we want, but we can't just ignore the fact that DPS has been falling off at a rapid rate. Yaki and Kai are not getting the job done anymore. I'm sorry to say because I know these two have a lot of fans, but they look hella mid. Kevster needs a lot more help than what they're offering right now. Glads are not a Sombra team. Their hit scan has been super inconsistent. Sometimes they're having Kevster play Sombra and Mei, and none of this stuff is going to help you win. It's just a big mess over there. So along with tank, you have DPS issues, and now it's also transferred over to support. As, I don't know if there was some kind of falling out with Lastro. I heard he doesn't want to play anymore. Maybe it has to do with Dante leaving. I don't know what the exact issue was there. But now Cal's there, and it feels super sudden, and he feels super out of place, like this was done in a panic move because something happened with Lastro. Making all of these changes out of the blue like this, it doesn't do you any good. When you're doing well, when you're actually respectable beforehand, this type of stuff actually could end up hurting you more than anything else. It's usually a lot more beneficial when your team sucks to make these kinds of changes. That's when it's more of a positive effect, because you know everything's terrible and you have to make changes. You're not questioning yourselves, you know what the problem is. With Glads, it felt more like they panicked. And in a desperation act, after maybe parting ways with Dante too soon, maybe not getting the right tank player right from the very start, they've gone from a fun underdog to perhaps, I'm saying perhaps, I don't know for sure, the worst team in the entire Western Conference. And along with that, reason number 2 for the Glads potentially having a downfall they can't recover from is their schedule. With NYXL 2 times, plus the Outlaws and Boston on their schedule still, the danger of missing the play-ins is looming. There's a world where they're going to lose all of those games, and if they don't win any of them, everybody else just by map differential is going to stay ahead of them, unless like they lose all of these in a map 5. That's like the only possible way I could see them maybe holding on, but even then, that's just all luck based. So Glads, in other words, if they don't win a game, they don't control their own destiny, and it's probably over for them. Like, that's a very difficult schedule to go through. NYXL, while they aren't like a god level team, they have shown some good fight, especially in the last few weeks. I mean, that Florida game showed me a lot. New York are definitely in a right place. They're a lot more confident. They're not so much questioning themselves. So really, those are going to be their only chances. It's doubtful that they beat Houston or Boston. So if Glads don't step up against New York and improve things mega fast, their season is most certainly over. There's only a small possibility that they're going to get out of this unscathed. There is a strong possibility, though, that they go winless and they end up missing out on the play-ins in perhaps one of the biggest collapses I have seen in recent memory. I mean, they're competing with the Charge for that, of course, but they're up there as well. Aside from that, though, I'm ready to move on from something not so fun to talk about to something a bit more interesting, and that's going to be our guy Benbest, who broke out the ANA during this series against the Vancouver Titans. Not necessarily his idea, but it happened. I'll just play this in the background for you, but yeah, our guy Benbest was fending for his life on this ANA as a main tank player with no prior support experience. Maybe it would have been better to have him on the break, but you know, I'm not a coach, I'm not a professional, so maybe there's something I don't know. Maybe break's just harder to play right now, but basically, if you missed this game and you don't know the context, the Justice were getting creamed by the Titans. Like, it was a bad week for them. They're having a lot of issues, and questions were starting to arise when all of a sudden Benbest came in out of nowhere. But quickly, Coach Get Amazed put that speculation to bed with the following tweet. So he said, "We were supposed to have Dong Hoon with us this week before our Titans match, but he had some visa issues. He was playing on almost 200 ping, and from my POV, it almost felt impossible to react, and it was causing us a lot of lost fights." And that's pretty fair right there, right? As Brig, you know, with how crazy thing is in the current meta, you've really got to be on top of your game with those reactions because you could get blown up so easily. Also, though, he said lately, when Donghoon had to miss some scrims, we played Ben and we had decent results. What decent means, that's up to you. But he said, we were hard losing, so I took the game ball. It didn't work, but I think that's part of the game. For the people that are saying I inted, a true int is to look at my players losing without trying anything different. I'm sure we will make it back like always, thanks to the fans. And I think that's pretty fair, right? I think a lot of this Benbest stuff becomes very warranted now. This was not a meme. This was a coach's attempt of changing things up in a hard situation when, sticking with what you had probably wasn't in the team's best interest because it was just so hard for Donghoon to play the game. He did what he could with one of his players at a severe disadvantage. This was the answer off of the little practice they had. It didn't go well for them, but that's the way the game goes sometimes, especially when you have a player playing from a big distance like that. However, on a more encouraging note, as you can see here, Donghoon had his appointment 2 days ago, and he'll likely be joining us early next week. So there's a chance that Donghoon will be off of ping as early as this week, which is really, really awesome. Maybe, just maybe, Washington could have some better results in the near future that are more encouraging after he arrives, after he's on normal ping, meeting his teammates in person. In the meantime, though, the Justice are definitely not super safe. Like, there's still room for them to improve, and they have some great players. But with them also being at 5 wins, as you can see here, they're not out of the woods by any means, especially if Glads end up picking things up and the Justice continue to spiral, right? Like, it's very doable for Gladiators to jump over them if things go a certain way. And the Justice themselves have some very challenging games ahead of them, and there's a possibility that they too could go winless, which means they may actually have to depend on some luck in the end to avoid disaster as well. The Justice, like many other teams, have a very important last couple of weeks coming up, so we'll be watching their performances with great interest. Speaking of interesting performances, though, how about we move into the Guangzhou Charge? They're obviously a pretty big talking point. They recently made some big changes with their team. Piggy's gone, Gaga in, Choi Se-wan out, Jinmu in, excuse me. And in terms of like an update of how they did, I mean, it depends on how you look at it. Maybe not the most promising considering they lost both of their games to the Dragons and to the Dallas Fuel in a 3-1. Maybe as expected, I guess you could say. But they did manage to take maps in both of those games, which is maybe a bit of a positive surprise. Like, miraculously, they found a way to pull it off. That's a decent sign for the future because it's still early on in their partnership with this new team without any real coaching. But they were never clearly in control in either series, and something's definitely lacking. That was my concern coming into the week with this new team, and it's coming into fruition. They're just missing that big star to really push them. They have a lot of good supporting cast members, but without that big guy, like Choi Se-wan or Leave, if you're thinking about Chengdu from back in the day, it's purely on your teamwork and a dream, and I don't know if that's enough. They lack that star tracer player, even though Jinmu is getting better. Like, any semblance of a rush comp on top of that, they don't really have. They lack that, and they are kind of anti-meta as well. Gaga likes to play Wrecking Ball. Obviously, Jinmu's a Pharah player, and that stuff is maybe a bit too obscure. It's not like London where they're at least playing things that make sense. Guangzhou are throwing things at the wall in that situation. Like, I'm glad they look decent at least when they're playing the Sombra stuff, but it's just not enough. I'm happy they're showing some life, but I don't know if the confidence necessarily changes in them. There's a chance that they can only get better from here if they're showing some okay results right off the bat, but how much further can they really go? How lucky can they get as we head into knockouts? I really don't know. Like, they're on a big-time downward path to potentially go from the best team in APAC a couple months ago to the literal worst. This is like a horrifying transformation, and perhaps one of the quickest peaks and folds that we've ever seen in this league. Their success story lasted for all of 1 month, and that is extremely sad. It's my hope that the early map wins can lead to improvement, but the optimism isn't really there, and in my opinion, their season feels pretty over. It's not looking good, but at least the Chengdu boys get one last ride, right? On the topic of not looking good, though, now I want to move into a couple of funny moments during this week. And it's, of course, everybody's favorite game, the C9 game. We had a couple of really horrid ones out east in particular. This first one takes the cake as easily one of the worst I've seen in recent memory. It's not so much like Youngjin literally walking off cart levels of bad, but this is just the cart rolling in from 61 meters and just being completely ignored. Like, so as you can see, right now, Panthera are looking to recontest. They're making their push. All of the O2 guys have high ground. They're in a decent place. but they're completely ignoring where this card is right now. It is already past them at this point. Nice has snuck by them, and still no one's noticed. Here they are, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80 meters. I think now their Ana's just going to recognize now. We're at 85. Now Develop realizes what's going on while they're finding some kills and stuff, and it's already too late at that point. You're done for. And they end up losing the map because of that as well. Like, come on, man. You literally gave up what? You went from 61 to 80 to 90 meters. So you gave up like 30 meters for free and you didn't even realize that the car was moving. That is horrible. Like, the car literally moved by you. It went through the underpass. How you managed to do that, I don't know, but I find it very impressive. But also, I mean, this one wasn't as bad, but it stood out to me as well. When Dynasty were playing Poker Face, Prophet kind of snuck around and got a back cap of his own. Basically, it seems like, you know, they're going to drive Prophet out of there. They're peppering him with damage. He's going to go to the health pack. You're all good. But the Dynasty had a plan here. They were going to nano Prophet, have him going from behind, and hope for the best. And it worked out better than you think. You know, they all jumped onto Krillin over there. But with all those bodies there, it was just up to Aiden, really, to contest Cart. And Bella's Rhea also joined in, and then no one touched. Like, I don't know exactly what ended up happening here. I think Muse jumps in, and then Muse kind of, like, just doesn't come back. I think he tried to get the health pack, or, like, he was chasing someone. I don't know. But at that point, it's up to Victoria to touch him. He just doesn't. And, like, Valentine just gets back. He can't make it. Like, no one's there. Where's the focus here? Victoria's in position to touch this, and he just doesn't. I don't know if he ran out of blanks, but yeah. Also a pretty bad one. Obviously, that 0-2-1 takes the place, or takes the cake, though. That was, like, god-awful. Yeah. Aside from that, though, I think those are all the bad C9s I have for you. I think there are some other ones, but those are the ones that stood out. For some reason, it's always in the East. I don't know, man. It's specifically these contenders teams. They just don't like the objective for some reason. But now let's move on to one section that we do pretty constantly in these podcasts, at least as of late, and that is ATP's Performers of the Week, where I pick one player from each position that I think had a standout performance that I want to give a lot of credit to and show some highlights of. And for DPS, I'm going with our guy Prophet. He didn't beat anyone out of this world, but he got 2 player of the matches. He's been getting player of the match like every time for the Dynasty. He's been insanely clutch. He looks like a dude reborn. I mean, for a while, he was really checked out this season. Coming into this year, he said he doesn't really care as much. He just wants to have fun. But, you know, it just wasn't enough. Dynasty maybe needed a bit more. Obviously, he was not the problem, like, in any way, but maybe him being checked out kind of affected the team's vibe and mindset. He took some time off at one point. He was burnt out. He just wasn't caring that much. And now all of a sudden it feels like a flip has been switched. Like, he really wants to win again. That classic Prophet focus is back in form. He clutched out against Dreamers in a map 5 as well, more importantly. Like the Poker Face, they won 3-0, but he had a big performance against Dreamers to push them over the edge against them, get a well-needed map 5 victory that keeps them in the race for a decent seed heading into the knockouts in a couple of weeks. I don't know if Prophet is playing better, maybe because the league is going to end soon, or because his competitive drive came back, or maybe he just doesn't want the season to end this way, or he's bored, he doesn't want to have Dynasty be so sad, especially if this is the last season. I don't really know exactly what's going on, but he looks more focused, and the team around him has improved as well. And the baby-faced assassin ended up playing really good this week. Nothing but good things to say about him. His Tracer was on a mission from start to finish. He even broke out a signature Genji as well. Man was on point. Man had a really awesome game. I think this is the Genji play here, right? Gets like a couple kills with the blade. Looking good. But yeah, I think he deserves DPS Player of the Week for how he did. As for my support player of the week, with how I was talking about him earlier, it should come to no surprise that I am going with my guy Fielder. Specifically for this Boston game, I know they lost to Florida, but he was so locked in for this match. I mean, look where this nade is. He doesn't even know where he can't even see what's over there. Obviously he knows where he's throwing, but he can't even see who could possibly get hit by this. Boom, gets Lee J gone with that. Sleep Smurf. He's just all over the place. He was so crazy, and I think it warrants him getting this type of recognition. He carried so damn hard in this series. Boston had so many opportunities to win, but he refused to give in. He refused to give up. It speaks for itself, and I really have nothing left to add aside from that. It was just every single fight, when it seemed like Boston might have a chance, he just ripped the life out of them and ended up getting almost 7 Bionade kills per 10, and he outplayed one of the better flex supports in the game in Twilight. As for tank, I don't really know if I have a specific player that really stood out with total dominance, but I'm going to give a shout out to someone. I don't have any gameplay to show, but I love the consistency that he has and that ability to run circles over less versatile tank players with the countless amazing heroes that he is dominant with. That stability that he has just gives, it gives way for a bunch of his teammates to step up and have room to do their thing and to feel comfortable. And that's really important. I know a lot of the time we're just looking at the guys who are flashy, that are playing crazy in game, but sometimes it's about being the facilitator rather than the main guy, right? Sometimes it's about setting up your teammates to success, because this is a team game after all, and someone played it absolutely perfectly, and I think he deserves some credit. Now then, with players of the week out of the way, we're going to look towards the future, as we tend to do in these podcasts as we enter the last couple of moments in the video. And the first place, I kind of mentioned it briefly with some teams, is the standings check. I'm just quickly going to move my camera to a better place. So here's your overview of the West in particular. The East, we can't really talk about that much because it's mostly knockouts that decides who makes playoffs. But in the West, every game matters here in all of the qualifiers. So, doing a bit of a standings check from bottom to top, doing some housekeeping. Valiant and Vegas, they officially can't make it. They're done. Their records are too trash. Vegas might go winless. Valiant just don't have enough time. Looking at the top, Atlanta Reign currently still have the 1 seed, despite losing to Florida Mayhem. Their map differential is just so damn high because of how good their season started. So they're holding on by a thread. And with that +4 differential compared to Florida, they're in a pretty decent place, I'd say, to finish up first, even though they have looked somewhat weak as of late. They're in a pretty nice position to figure this out. They just have to beat a couple of pretty beatable teams, and they're chilling. As for Mayhem, they just have to win both games, and they're going to be getting the 2 seed bare minimum. If Atlanta choke, maybe that opens things up for the 1 seed, but bare minimum, they could be number 2 if they beat Boston and whoever else they play. I don't remember exactly, but they're in a pretty good spot to at least make top 3 no matter what. Like, even if they just win one of their games, I think they have it locked up. At 13-3, Boston can't catch them because they only have 2 games left. Houston, I think, could leapfrog them, but it doesn't seem likely. They have, 4 games left. They'd have to dominate in all of them to even have a chance. Yeah, it's looking like Florida probably have the 2 seed, though, if I'm being honest with you. It's looking nice because of how well they've played as of late. And getting this win over Atlanta as well was so huge. It does so much for them. It really helps them avoid that play-in cutoff. As for Boston, if they want to get in, they need Houston to lose at least 1 of their last couple of games. And it's not looking likely because they have the easier schedule. So Boston, sadly, may just be playing for 4th place. They don't really control their own destiny at this point. It's depressing to think about because they've had a good year. But the West is stacked. It's very top-heavy. What can you really do there? Houston just have it easier off. It's more likely that they're going to go 2-0 than choke, and then have Boston possibly beat Florida. I don't even know if they will. Possibly beat Florida, and then win their next 2 overall. When it comes to the race, though, for the play-ins, which is where things are very interesting, right now, Vancouver Titans, London Spitfire, and San Francisco Shock are the safest of the 5 through 11 seeds because they all have 6 wins apiece. That gives them a well-needed cushion. If they even just get to 7 wins, they're probably in great shape to finish this off. A lot of these teams literally can't go 2-0. So they're sitting pretty if they just even get 1 more win. Titans, they ended up going all the way from 10th to 5th place, which is absolutely insane. Like, they're Their 2-0 week did so much for them. It booted Gladiators down, and it made their map differential one of the only positive ones in the league. One of only 5 teams with a positive map differential. Imagine that. Vancouver, one of the only 5 teams. Insane stuff. But yeah, they're looking pretty good. I believe they have Vegas coming up on their schedule. Vegas are scrappy, but that's a very doable team to beat. They're winless. A lot of things can go very wrong for them. So Titans are sitting pretty, I'd say. London Spitfire also are looking good. I mentioned them before, but 6-8, -5, and they have Valiant still on the agenda. I think they also play like Houston. They probably won't beat them, but if they even just beat Valiant and get up to 7-9, they're probably safe. I don't really see how anyone would surpass them. They're looking really good. They just need to win one more. It would take a big-time choke, or like Valiant to have the game of their lives for London to somehow miss out. That'd be tragic with this turnaround for it to be all for naught, but it's looking good for them. I'm feeling pretty confident in them, as well as Titans. And Shock, well, I'm not very impressed with what I've seen so far, and it's clear that that first week was just a sign that a lot of other teams are getting worse. They do at least have Vegas Eternal twice. They could lose those games, sure, but you'd expect them to take at least one of them. So, Shock are also likely going to be okay if I had to take a wild guess. New York Excelsior, looking at them, I think they also have a pretty okay shot of making it through, for the simple reason that they're playing some teams that have been struggling a bit. Justice depends on the week. I mean, they could definitely lose to them, but they do have the Gladiators twice. And just knowing how bad LA have been as of late, and how their season actually might already be over, New York could at least win one of those games, and if they get one, I'd feel pretty good. But I think there's a realistic chance they could win 2 of these 3 games and then, you know, get all the way up to 7, be safe, kind of like London, Shock, and Titans most likely are going to be. I think it's the 9, 10, and 11 where things are a bit more fuzzy and there's a bit less of a guarantee. Defiant, they've looked pretty good. They've shown some very competitive matches and they've been clutch, but their schedule is one of the tougher ones out there. They play a lot of these mid-level teams. I think they also have to play one of the top teams as well. I can quickly kind of just see if I can find it here. But, yeah, they play Houston. They're going to play Houston next week, right? And they play Washington, who they could beat, but also could lose to. It feels like a 50-50. Later on, they're playing Vancouver. They barely beat them. That's a 50-50. And they also play Washington a second time. Again, a 50-50 matchup. So in a way, Toronto or Washington could end up missing out, you know? If, like, Toronto, let's say, win both of those games, or Washington win both of those games, they could screw over the other team into missing out completely. So that's definitely something to think about. And in turn, that means the Justice also have it pretty difficult. Toronto twice in a 50-50 affair. They also have Atlanta Reign, which you know they're not going to beat. And NYXL, which is tough because they've looked pretty good as of late. So Washington and Toronto are going to have it rough, but I think Gladiators probably have it the worst. With New York twice, if they don't improve, they're going to lose to them easily, like probably 3-0. They play Houston, who, you know, they're just not going to beat Houston, right? We don't even have to think about that. So New York twice, Houston, I think their other game's Boston, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So you're playing 2 of the top 4 teams from the West, right? And then a New York team that's on the rise. That's a pretty difficult ask if you're Gladiators. Even just winning one of them would be absolutely huge, but with how they look right now, and with them possibly being the worst team out West, I don't know if it's doable. Under normal circumstances, you'd be pretty confident in a team with Kevster on it. But right now, man, with how they're playing, with all the weird stuff going on with them, I would not say that anything's guaranteed. And if I'm a Gladiators fan, I would be sweating bullets. They have it extremely rough, and they're in the worst place out of any of these mid-level teams to miss out on the play-in tournament. Like, they dropped so many places, they look so dead, and they have the most difficult path to clinch, arguably. So many of these teams are set to play each other, though. I think that's what makes it interesting and at least gives Glads a chance if they're able to rebound somehow. A lot of these mid-teams are going to play each other in games with a chance to knock the other one out. Like, even just winning one game against one of these other guys could be enough to seal your spot and have you not worry anymore. There's a realistic chance that a couple of these guys could be going down to the wire, like literally the very last day, to decide who ends up watching from home. For Gladiators fans, I pray it's not you, because Kevster not even being in the play-ins sounds ridiculous, but that's where we're currently at right now. That's it. The West is wild. The wild, wild West. The top has some interesting scenarios, and the middle has some interesting scenarios. And there's only 4 games at most for all of the teams moving forward. Some only have 2. So the window is starting to close. Who's going to step up and who's going to choke? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you want to know what the East is like, honestly, I don't really think I can go into much detail with them. They barely even keep track of the standings. They make little sense to me, if I'm being honest with you. It mostly just depends on how you do in mid-season madness plus the knockouts anyway. So I'm not going to go into detail for that. Just know that, like, Infernal are probably in a really good spot, as well as Spark and Dallas. Those are probably the 3 teams who I'd argue are in the best places to clinch, just based off of how they did in mid-season madness and the knockouts and stuff, and how they could do in the summer as well. As for what's to come next week, I was kind of giving you a bit of a preview in a way, but we have some very important Western games. Houston obviously need to win. Gladiators, New York, that is a huge one. Both of their seasons are on the line. Whoever wins that is in a really good spot. If Vancouver beat Vegas, they're probably safe. They're probably clinching. So there's that. Looking at the next day, New York play Washington. Again, really big matchup between 2 mid-level Western teams. And then Shock play Titans, with both of them having a chance to possibly clinch. So there's that. That could be a really close one. The last time these two played, it was very interesting, but a lot has changed since then. And it's also Heesang's potential revenge game. How about that? Heesang gets to play against Proper finally. He might get revenge on his former team and show them that he doesn't need them. That's really exciting. I'm kind of hoping Vancouver wins. No offense, Shock fans. No offense. I'm just saying I think that would be really funny and really cool if Heesang, because I love that guy and I want him to do well. No hard feelings there. And then on Sunday, there's only 2 games. Again, Toronto, Washington could be big. Vegas, maybe, I emphasize maybe, have a chance of winning a game. Shock could be beatable. I mean, they really haven't looked that great. They got 3-0'd by Spitfire. Vegas literally played better against Spitfire. Like, Vegas have been the team that have put up the best fight against London. Shock almost lost to Valiant. Vegas did, though. So maybe these two could end up having a close game unless Shock are actually, like, super locked in and they improved a lot over a very short amount of time during their bye week. But Vegas are scrappy, man. There's some added pressure there. Shock have a lot of pressure in a way, you know? They have to deal with, trying to meet very high expectations that they had during the preseason. The expectations of their fans who expect them to be winning, of course, because that's their culture. And they have to worry about not being the first team to lose to a winless team. So that could be a pretty challenging game for the Shock. I won't lie to you. I'm not saying there's a guarantee it's a banger, but I don't know. I could see it. Freaking Proper versus Knife. 2 O2 Blast alumni, 2 godlike tracers. That could be pretty darn epic. As for what's going on in the East, fun fact, they're actually in the home stretch. This is going to be their final week of qualifiers before knockouts happened and we get introduced to the contenders teams in a big tournament. It'll probably be set up in the same way, I'd have to imagine, as the mid-season madness, but we'll see there. But there's going to be some fun ones out there as well. Dynasty and Infernal play each other, not Dallas. The Battle of Seoul Part 2 is about to happen. The last time, Dynasty ended up stunning Infernal. Since then, both of these teams have gone on a wild ride. Dynasty have gone way down, Infernal have gone way up, but Infernal just lost to Dallas recently. Dynasty are starting to play better, so that could be a good game. I don't think it'll be on LAN just because Infernal are dealing with COVID stuff recently. But maybe Infernal will feel the pressure because that's one of the only teams they've lost to this year. And it's kind of what started a trend of them not being good on LAN. Nothing set in stone, though, in the East. I think that's what's important. That's why I think this game's really important for Dynasty. Also, though, Dallas are going to be playing the Hangzhou Spark. That's what I meant by Dallas before, I think. Another way for Dallas to prove themselves, maybe a way for Spark to go back in the right direction after maybe looking a little bit shaky the last couple of weeks. Maybe they're just waiting for playoffs because Spark just have a tendency to play better then. But this is a good chance for them and a good chance for Dallas to show why they're on top as well. So both of these games on the same day could be a pretty big banger. Obviously, we also have to monitor the Charge's progress, and the Dragons have a chance to continue their comeback arc. They get a shot at Seoul Infernal. Guangzhou play Dynasty. There's some fun matches to look forward to. Guangzhou play Dreamers, the team that knocked them out of midseason madness. There's a lot going on over there as well. Both regions are coming down to the wire, and it's looking super duper exciting. And the East is super wide open. You don't know what's going to happen. A lot of teams are inconsistent. Sometimes it literally depends on the week. I'd say that probably Dallas and Infernal are going to be locks most likely, but Spark, maybe not. I feel like they have the best chance because they always play better in the clutch, but with how they've looked recently, maybe that gives room for like Dynasty or Dragons or maybe even Dreamers to pull through. You never know. The East really is wide open. We've seen plenty of OWL teams over there lose to contenders teams. I wouldn't be surprised at this point with how wacky that region is. It'd be extremely cursed, but I think it's very, very possible. In the meantime, though, I think that's basically going to do it. Things are coming down to the wire in the West and the East. There's a lot of exciting action. The season has just a couple of months to go at this point. The Grand Finals is approaching at a very vast rate, and we still have a lot of question marks in line for us to try and answer. There is a big time race to the finish line, and I'm really hoping that excitement can continue and we have some kind of photo finish. Let me know what you thought of this week of the Overwatch League Summer Stage Qualifiers down in the comments, though. And also what you're possibly looking forward to heading into these last couple of weeks, and what you think of the play-in scenarios in the West, and what games you're really excited for, all that good stuff. Let me know down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this podcast episode and you want to stay up to date with the series, make sure to give it a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I'll be catching you tomorrow for, in all likelihood, a What is Wrong with LA Gladiators video. Peace.